Is the thing that makes you a great writer the same thing that's stopping you publishing? For many writers, the answer is yes. But not only is it keeping you from publishing your work, it's also sucking the joy out of the writing process. So today, I'm going to show you how I help these writers publish their first newsletters using what I believe to be the best way to kickstart your writing practice for easy output. So what is it? Why is it so powerful? And how can it help you come up with your greatest ideas? That's coming up. But first, you've got to understand the thing that's holding you back from writing in the first place. It's editing. Now, of course, nobody's going to say that writers should never edit their work. Editing is a powerful tool, if used properly. But to show you what happens when it goes wrong, let me tell you about one of the worst teachers that I ever had. This was when I was studying French in Montreal. My teacher would call on students randomly to speak out in class, and he had this habit of interrupting us mid-sentence to correct our mistakes. I'll never forget the day that a German student in our class named Anselm said "Je suis froid" instead of "j'ai froid." The teacher completely shut him down in front of the entire class.
Non, sacre bleu.
Well, no, this was in Quebec, so it was probably something more like
Ben ça.
That's when I realized a powerful lesson about editing mistakes. After having spent 10 years of teaching academic and professional writing to non-native English speakers, let me be the first to tell you that what language learners need is not error correction. It's the comfort and confidence in using the language so that they can go on using it outside of the classroom. It's only through the use of the language that we actually learn how to recognize and correct mistakes on our own. And if that sounds obvious with language learning, what I want you to realize is that this is exactly what we do to ourselves whenever we write. It happens to me, you, and even Stephen King. Early in his career, Stephen King worked at a local newspaper where his editor, John Gould, gave him a piece of advice that he never forgot. Write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. This advice underscores a key difference between writing and rewriting. When you're writing, the only audience is you. You're telling yourself the story. That's writing with the door closed. But when you're rewriting, the focus shifts to the reader. You're polishing, you're cutting, you're clarifying. You're making your ideas understandable to somebody outside of your own head. That's writing with the door open. And the really important point is to keep these two processes separate. So the problem is not editing per se. The problem is that writers try to edit at the same time that they're producing, which is like having an editor constantly looking over your shoulder, criticizing every word before you've even finished writing the sentence. So how do you break out of this trap? How do you separate writing from editing so that you can actually finish something? Well, the trick is simple. You need to practice non-editing. Here's how. Writing 2,000 words in a 2-hour writing session is difficult, but you know what's easy? Writing 250 words in 15 minutes. That's like one sentence a minute. So set a timer. Give yourself 15 minutes or whatever works for you to just write. No backspacing, no second guessing, no lifting your fingers off of the keyboard. But what happens when you get stuck? You can't think of the perfect word or you don't know what happens next. Well, here's where you use placeholders. Write the first word that comes to your mind and then just write in brackets, find a better word, and keep going. When you practice this, inevitably, a voice is going to creep up into your mind and convince you that you just need to do a little bit more research. You just need to go get another cup of tea. You just need to clean your living room. You just need to file your taxes. And this is totally natural. So whenever this happens during one of your timed writing sessions, all you need to do is calmly, gently, take out some baby powder, dust up your hand, and then slap that bitch in the mouth. Whenever the timer is going, it's writing time. So do not give in to that voice that's trying to convince you that there's anything else to do. And in this vein, it's also helpful to turn off distractions. Now, I know, of course, everybody knows eliminate distractions, but here's what I do. Personally, I like to write in the program Obsidian, which is like a plain text editor. This keeps me out of my browser. I really don't know how people can write in Google Docs because when the browser's open, you can be pulled in any direction. And even with writing in a plain text editor, I still like to use an app called Opal to block my access to other distracting websites. It basically bricks your phone and your computer, so it makes it impossible to open any other apps or visit any other websites during your dedicated writing time. Finally, and this is the most important part of non-editing, it's that you make a clear distinction distinction in your mind between writing and editing, and you save editing for later. I've seen in a lot of writers' daily schedules that they'll have their morning session dedicated to writing, and then, a block in the afternoon after lunch to go over things and clean it up. These are two distinct processes, and it's really important to get them separated in your mind. When you're writing, you're producing. When you're editing, you're perfecting. Now, of course, editing is important, but I say all this because more often than not, editing just becomes a form of virtuous procrastination. You think you're doing something good, but it's just a strategy for avoiding the discomfort of writing. Writing without editing causes some amazing things to happen. Not only do you get the ideas out of your head and onto the page, but when they're there on the page, your ideas start to grow and take on a life of their own. Speaking of growth, here I am at my high school graduation. What a promising young man. And Cheerios, if you're out there, call me. And here I am today, teaching at one of the top universities in South Korea. Hard to believe that it's the same person. But the fact is that I grew up in the same way that everything grows, including your ideas. And whenever you understand how ideas grow, you'll stop being embarrassed by the ideas that seem so stupid when they come up during these free writing sessions. Writing is thinking, and if you're writing about anything important, then you're thinking thoughts that have never been thought before. You don't quite know how to put it because there's not like a ready-made handle for it. You've never said this stuff before. You've never brought it up into language. And so of course it's hard, and of course it sounds stupid. But when you write about your ideas before they've fully formed, you actually give them a chance to grow and mature. It works like this. You've set one of your writing timers and you start writing about an idea or belief. Let's call it X. So you write down this belief and you think it's pretty solid, but as you write, you realize something that you didn't quite expect. Maybe X isn't as correct as you thought, or maybe you don't even believe it anymore. So you keep writing, and now you're writing about your uncertainty, wrestling with the confusion, and then something clicks. A new idea emerges. Let's call it Y. So now you're writing about Y, and you explore it, develop it, refine it, and by the time you finish, you're satisfied. You started writing about X, but now you've finished writing about Y. That's how ideas grow through writing. They evolve as you work on them, transforming into something more refined and powerful than where they began. Like an acorn to a tree or an awkward teenager to a writing professor, simple ideas move through a series of changes, each stage more complex and more refined than the last. Anytime I've written something I'm proud of, it's because I allowed that process to happen. And whenever I've struggled or created something disappointing, it's almost always because I rushed it or didn't let the process unfold. New ideas always sound stupid or half-baked when we first write about them, and that's because they are. It's a thought you've never thought before. But if you can bring yourself to just spit it out, you bring that idea into the world and you give it the space and the energy that it needs to develop. So think of the ideas that you write kind of like single-celled organisms. As a writer, your job is just to give them energy and to foster an environment where they can grow and interact. And most importantly, for you to just stay out of their way. And when you write without the interference of editing, strange and exciting things start to happen. Relationships and ideas that are richer than what you could have planned start to emerge. It starts to feel like the words and ideas take on a life of their own, and it makes your job as a writer much simpler. You don't need to be a genius. You just need to show up and help these ideas get to where they're going. So if you want to help your ideas grow through writing, here are some tips. Talk to yourself in your writing. Now, personally, whenever I do this, I like to use the pronoun you instead of I. So instead of saying, I believe X to be true, you say, you believe X to be true. This is something I picked up from the diaries of Krishnamurti, and I always stuck with it. I feel like that switch allows me to step outside of myself and observe my thinking without any attachment to the ideas. Whenever a sentence feels wrong, don't stop. Write about why it feels wrong, how you noticed it feels wrong, or whatever else you're thinking about it. This practice breaks down the barrier between your real ideas and your good ideas, and it frees up your voice. Third, don't let beginnings stop you. You can push through with placeholders like the thing is, or what I'm trying to say is, or what I'm writing about is. You can always revise this later. Just anything to get you started is good enough. Fourth, as a teacher, I can confirm that having an audience really helps. Sometimes I'll be working on a lesson plan all night and I get really stressed out because it's just not coming together, and I show up to class the next day feeling totally unprepared. But whenever I walk into the seminar room, everything just kind of falls into place and the class is really fluid and fun. So if you're stuck during a writing session, pretend you're speaking to an audience and you have only 30 minutes to get your point across. Set a timer, start anywhere, and just keep going. Often midway through, you'll get hit with these waves of like clarity and inspiration, and you'll say, yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Now, if writing really feels impossible for you, then you can switch to talking. Years ago, I heard a really good interview on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and I looked it up, I tried to find it, and I can't find it. So if you know this podcast, then please link it down below the like button. But in this podcast, Tim Ferriss was interviewing a guy who had a pretty impressive output. I think he was a scientist. But he said that all of his writing happens through voice to text. So he speaks into a microphone and the computer transcribes it. And this was a while ago. I remember he was talking about how he had subscribed to some expensive software, but these days that text-to-speech software is totally free. So you can just set a timer, speak out loud as if somebody's listening to you, and keep talking. The point is that you just keep going. Now, if you've tried all these steps and it's still not working, then honestly, don't force it. Don't swim upstream if the current is trying to take you someplace else. Step away and listen to the part of you that's resisting. You can do this by taking a walk or journaling, but that voice in you, that's still you, and it might have something important to say. Now, this messy, iterative process is something that I call working with words. Whenever you're working with words, you're not judging the quality of the ideas. You're just trying to keep your stream of consciousness flowing, one word at a time. Kind of like a painter showing up to their studio, not really sure what they're gonna paint that day, but showing up, putting in the time and energy, and just playing with the paint. Eventually, you start to see patterns emerge. These moments of inspiration aren't pre-planned things. They kind of strike you in the process. And by giving your words this energy and freedom, you'll start to recognize these patterns and ideas that'll emerge. And you'll end up with something far better than you could have imagined at the start. But the problem with working with words is that it makes a total mess. I could never share this with readers, so what's the point? That's where the second part of this writing technique comes in. Do you ever find yourself staring at a blank page, waiting for the perfect idea to strike you like a bolt of lightning? Like a bolt of lightning, that's pretty cliche. What would be a better simile? Waiting for the perfect idea to strike like a teacher's union? Like a bowling alley? Do you ever find yourself staring at an empty page, waiting for the perfect idea to strike? I don't know about you, but I often find myself trapped in this cycle where I'm either writing passionately or passively waiting for inspiration. But these two modes, writing and waiting for inspiration, what if there was a way to join them to ensure that you never have to face a blank page again? This is kimchi. It's the national dish of Korea, and it's made of cabbage, green onion, chilies, salt, and a bunch of other ingredients. I'm going somewhere with this, trust me. But kimchi isn't made by just tossing these ingredients together like a salad. It's the bubbling, fermenting, and breaking down that creates something greater than the sum of its parts. The longer these materials interact with each other, the richer and funkier it gets. Funkier. We want funk. And just as kimchi is not simply a mix of cabbage, chilies, and spices, writing is not just the words on the page. It's the fermentation of the ideas that creates something extraordinary. The words that we generate during these timed writing sessions are only the raw ingredients, but the real magic happens whenever we mix these ideas together. Bringing them together on the page lets them interact and ferment, and that transforms them into something richer and deeper and funkier. Even if the ideas don't seem to belong together, they can lead to surprising interactions. Idea A probably seemed too basic or simple whenever you first wrote it, but now it becomes a metaphor for explaining one aspect of idea B. Idea C sounded so cliche when you first wrote it, but now it could become a new lens for understanding idea D. So just as fermentation drives the creation of kimchi's complex flavors, the interaction of these ideas can lead you to new insights, and that is where I found the best ideas come from. So here are some simple steps that you can use in your next writing session in order to funkify your ideas. The easiest way to do this is to alternate between working with words and working with ideas. It doesn't matter which one comes first. If you want to begin by working with words, then it's like we said, you set a 10-minute timer and write about anything that comes to mind. At the end of the timer, you zoom out, read over what you've written, and you write a one-sentence summary for any ideas that stand out to you. But if you want to begin working with ideas, then jot down any thought that intrigues you and you want to write about, and set a timer for 10 or 15 minutes, and let your mind wander while you keep that idea in view. So you're still working with words, you're writing down anything that comes to mind, but you're trying to stay oriented toward that single idea. At the end, you repeat this process. You look at your words to find any ideas that stand out, you summarize those ideas at the bottom, and then you can alternate again between working with words and working with ideas. This interaction between working with words and working with ideas is exactly what I use anytime I feel stuck writing. And it'll stop you sitting back and worrying about what to write about because you know exactly what to do. Over time, your body of work starts to build up and take on a life of its own. But eventually, we need to start preparing these ideas into something that readers can find valuable. Now, if you check with most of the writing advice out there, you're gonna get tips on formal elements of writing like grammar and organization. But the problem is that readers don't give a toss about grammar and organization. So in order to learn how to develop your ideas into valuable writing, watch this video next because it's gonna show you how to position your ideas as the solution to problems that readers actually care about. So be sure to go check it out.